Hi guys. So I'm Becca. I'm the person behind Shadowed Behavior, and today we're doing our first hi. Today we're doing our first Q&A here at Shadowed Behavior. So we have had 6 questions come in, I believe, which is pretty exciting for our first Q&A. I'm pretty excited about it. I have them off to the side here, which is why you see me glancing away all the time. But yeah, so I'm just going to dive in. Our first question comes from one of our followers named Claire, and she asks, how do you apply equestrianism and applied behavior analysis together? Can you give some examples? So we can definitely dive into this. This is one of the main reasons I made shadowed behavior, is not to demonstrate, not to create this, but to just shed light on this. So the fact of the matter is that applied behavior analysis is used everywhere all the time. It's covered pretty much anything anybody's ever done. It can be used on any living organism up to and including plants. So it's everywhere. And what I've been seeing a lot is people tend to get more involved and into using these behavioral techniques and these behavioral methods with their horses, which is excellent. But if you don't have a super strong foundation in any kind of behavior, whether it be operant or classical, it's going to be kind of difficult to be able to understand the information that you're reading or the articles that you're reading or anything like that, and then properly apply it to your horse or whatever animal or human or whatever. So the goal of shadowed behavior is to just sort of announce and sort of demonstrate how applied behavior analysis is used to work with horses, train horses, and then build relationships with the equines too. So some of the examples that I can give you is the majority of equestrianism is going to use what's called negative reinforcement. So negative reinforcement is one of the 4 main consequences that I went over in one of my earlier posts. Just a quick little review if you didn't happen to see it. It's reinforcement would increase the future frequency or intensity of a behavior. And then negative and positive, the terms that you'll see before, usually reinforcement or punishment, are strictly mathematical. So negative means I took something away from the situation. You can think about this all the time, especially if you're a horse trainer with horses responding to pressure, right? So if I pull a certain way, the horse moves that way, then I release. That's their reward, is that release of pressure. That would be an example of negative reinforcement. Some people do use positive reinforcement. It's becoming much more popular in the equestrian field, but an example of positive reinforcement would be something along the lines of, if your horse comes up to you in the field and you give them a treat, the behavior of the horse coming up to you in the field and then them getting something, which is the treat, is reinforcement if that behavior occurs more frequently or with a higher intensity. So intensity in that, I guess you could measure whether or not your horse canters up to you or walks up to you, or takes a really long time and maybe takes a break walking up to you. There are some instances of punishment in equestrianism. Another one of the consequences that we could look into is extinction, but we're going to save those for later. We're going to do a little video on that later on, probably this week or next week, about how punishment varies from reinforcement and extinction. The next question comes from a follower named Emily, and she asked, what got you into equestrianism and applied behavior analysis? Do you see minor or major improvements with the work done with Shadow? Little and slow improvements or big and fast improvements? So I've been horseback riding since I was, I think, about 5 or 6. So it's been almost 20 years now. And I just always loved horses. I was just that horse girl in school. Applied behavior analysis, though, I sort of fell backwards into it, as I find myself doing with a lot of things in my life. I went to Millersville University to study psychology with the hopes of becoming a therapist and a clinical psychologist. And I signed up for a class called The Introduction to the Behavior of Learning. And being an undergrad and not reading the course description, I was like, awesome, I'm going to learn how students learn in classrooms, which is not at all what it was. Thank goodness. It was taught by this phenomenal professor that I had, and it was all about the talking points that I've had so far in my posts, whether it's positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, how behavior can be shaped, how it can be demonstrated, and things of that nature. And I fell in love with behavior because I realized that it was everything that I've done and everything that I am doing with horses, and how I can work with horses and how I can work with people through behavior. So I kind of went to her during her office hours one day, and I was like, the more that I look into it, the more I want to do behavior. And we sat down, we did, a big discussion, and I ended up getting my master's from Drexel in applied behavior analysis. And I'm working towards licensure and national certification right now. So pretty exciting. So that's my background for that. I do not have a formal horse degree or equine science, equine studies, anything like that. Just sort of, the basic knowledge that I have. So for the next part of her question, she asks, do you see minor or major improvements with the work done with Shadow, little and slow versus big and fast? So for the improvements that I see, I would definitely say that it's not an overnight, transition. It's definitely something that takes a long time and a lot of consistency. One of the things that we'll get into later on is something that is called like schedules of reinforcement and different types of essentially your consequences, and whether or not you're consistent in them can totally affect the way that a behavior is. So that's one of the most important things, is just the consistency, which can be really difficult. Like if your horse is having a hard time being turned in and out and is like at the gate rearing up or something like that, and you want to work with that behavior, but you board your horse at a facility and you work full time, unless you speak to every single staff member at that facility, there's no way, and even if you do, there's no way that the behavioral manipulation that you want to do is going to be consistent just between individuals and between day-to-day examples. So, I mean, the things that I've seen with Shadow definitely take a lot of time. I met Shadow 10 years ago, and he was a piece of work. But, I mean, he's just great. Working with him has definitely been a challenge. So Shadow lost his eye about 2 years ago. He went blind in it a long time ago, but we had to get it removed from his head. So he is a cyclops. He has one eye. He had it, and enucleation is what it's actually called. And one of the things that was most difficult was I decided to go with like voice and like / pitch training. So when you lunge a horse, you stick them out on a long rope and they watch you with one of their eyes, and you sort of use your body language to ask them to move forward in a gait, move back in a gait, things like that. You apply pressure to certain areas, which is difficult if your horse doesn't have an eye on that side. So what I ended up doing, and I'm going to do a whole video on this later too, is sort of working with him to teach contingencies and transfer contingencies on one side where he can see me to my voice training, and then take them over to the other side so he was able to both understand what I was asking him and still be able to perform. And he latched onto that so quickly. He picked it up very quickly. So there are times where, you'll see the improvement and it is the most rewarding thing in the world. And then there's other times where you're like pulling your hair out, waiting for this improvement to happen or this behavior to decrease or one or the other. One of my favorite quotes, and of course, whoever said it is totally walking right out of my head right now, but is, I think it was Buck Brannaman, but he says, if you go into the ring like you have 15 minutes, it will take all day. But if you go into the ring like you have all day, it'll take 15 minutes. So our next question comes from a follower named Kate. Hi, Kate. I see you commented. She asks, how does a horse's personality change or influence how you make a plan to shape a specific behavior? She did put personality in quotes. So this is definitely an interesting one. I want to say that their personality per se is something that I'm going to look at from a behavioral standpoint, because I'm going to look for those overt behaviors. So things that I can see, that I can measure, that are objective and concise and clear. So I can't, really use words when I'm working with a horse like, oh, they don't like that or they like this. I mean, unless I have like the hard data behind it. So for terms of a horse's personality, I'd most likely just try to, in any relationship where you're going to do any behavioral manipulation, the best thing to do before you start diving into that is to do pairing, is what they call it. So like, just sort of literally pair yourself with like preferred items, preferred activities, preferred outcomes. So like, and this can be done in a variety of ways. So if you're just starting to work with a horse, maybe like, instead of like quick grabbing them from the field, throwing them into the arena, starting to work with them right away, placing all of these, what's called like demands. So like, go this way, go that way, trot, canter, walk, jump, go over poles. You could take them, you could just brush them, you could go let them graze. Like, pair yourself and things that you do with these positive activities, which will help create, for lack of a better term, a relationship. And then when you go to ask these demands, they know that, one, in the past you have been paired with reinforcement, so they're going to want to work with you. And two, when you place these demands, they actually want to engage with them with you. They have at least what's, for lack of a better term, a relationship with you. One of my supervisors explained to me that pairing is an ongoing process. It is something that you need to do all the time. And she explained it to me like a bank account. So like each time you pair, you deposit money into your bank account, and each time you place a demand, you withdraw money from your bank account. So you need to make sure that with your horse, you are continuing to pair with them and not just do, activities that you want, or just pulling them out of the field to ride them, or pulling them out of the stall only to ride them, or only to place demands, because that's how you get horses that get sour. 1 second, we just got a comment through the live stream, so I'm gonna quick grab that one. Tell me if you would have adjust your therapy based on the horse's personality. I mean, if I was seeing, the best thing about science and applied behavior analysis as a science field is that it is something wherein, like, you can go, all right, well, because of X, Y, and Z, I'm going to try this treatment, or I'm going to try this thing to do to either increase or decrease a behavior that I'm seeing, depending on what the behavior is. And if all of a sudden I'm getting all of these maladaptive behaviors right after I implemented my treatment plan, then that's definitely something that I can work with and sort of unwind. And the best thing about science is there's no shame in saying that you're wrong, right? In fact, it's better to say that you're wrong and go back and fix it. That's one of the best things about the field, is like, okay, well, I tried treatment plan A because of X, Y, and Z, and that didn't work. So because of W, M, and N, I'm going to try treatment plan B. And you can go on and on until you find what works best. One of the things that I think is the most important, and I've been trying to come up with a nice, cute metaphor to explain this, but I can't find one, is that each horse is its own entity, and each human is its own entity, of course. So something that I work with Shadow, like Shadow loves the natural horsemanship stuff, and he's super into it, and that's great. But other horses aren't going to want that. Other horses aren't going to respond to that nicely. So each horse and each human, being their own thing, are going to have their own preferences. But then when they come together as a team, it's like creating something new, and each team is also its own entity. So you need to be able to identify what works for you, what works for your horse, and then move forward from there, while also incorporating behavioral aspects. So the horse's personality is definitely something that you would take into account, but it would be something that would be taken into account through, again, looking at those overt behaviors that you can see that are objectifiable and measurable. So moving on, our next question would be one that came from our follower named John. He asks, in working with Shadow, do you have a preference between positive and negative reinforcement? Does Shadow respond better to one versus the other, or is it situational? To be honest, I don't know if Shadow has a preference between positive and negative reinforcement. I'd imagine that he prefers reinforcement to punishment, as most people would. I would definitely say that it's situational. I thought about this a little bit too when he had originally commented it, and I think that personally I would prefer to have positive reinforcement. So again, just to review, you're looking at the main differences here for reinforcement, positive versus negative. The positive and negative are just mathematical. So to use like a real life example, positive reinforcement is if I say, can I have a cookie please, and somebody gives me a cookie, then I'm more likely to say, can I have a cookie please in the future. Versus negative reinforcement is when there's an aversive stimulus already in the environment, and then you take it away after a certain behavior has been performed. So let's see if I can think of one. I'm so in tune with the horses. So like, let's say for example, to ask your horse to move forward, right? You're going to squeeze with your lower leg and put pressure there. When your horse moves forward, you're going to take that pressure off. Taking that pressure off is the removal of that aversive stimulus, which would then quantify it as negative reinforcement. Another like everyday example, if you're out in a rainstorm and it starts to rain on you and you open your umbrella and then you're not wet anymore. Well, you're not getting wet anymore. You're not getting rained on. So what you're looking for there is that the opening of the umbrella is the behavior, and then the removal of being rained on is going to be what is the negative reinforcement. So you're removing the rain, technically, from your environment. I think Shadow honestly prefers positive reinforcement, as most people do. If you had a choice between gaining something versus having something unpleasant taken away, it's sort of situational. I personally would vote for getting something because I'm all for getting new things. But, again, it's going to be situational. It's going to be the preference of whoever you're working with. Our next question comes from a follower named Elena. Elena asks, have you had to change the ways you reinforce Shadow after he lost his eye? Have you ever noticed that certain sounds or motions spooked him, even if you were applying them to praise him? So if I'm applying something to praise my horse and it spooks him, then it's not praising him, first of all. Which is not anything bad in the question. It's just a matter of that's how finicky the words in applied behavior analysis can be. More importantly, one of the things that I realized with Shadow, and I mean I should have really realized sooner, is that while he was essentially totally blind in his eye, when I took it out, and if I didn't have a hand on him when I was like going around him or brushing him or walking him somewhere, he kind of had no idea where I was. So something that I started doing, rather than like trying to just like teach him that he always needed to like turn his head to look at me, was I always have my phone with me, and what I just decided to do was play music on my phone quietly in my back pocket. So like loud enough that he could hear it, but not so loud that he couldn't hear other things going on too. And that way it was just like sort of an environmental change that I was able to put into the program for him. Because that way he can track where I am based off of where the music's coming from. And he started to learn like, when he could hear the music, he would turn his head to see me or something of the like. So that's one of the main things that I did with Shadow. Otherwise, I mean, his preferences didn't really change given the fact that I removed his eye. One of the things that Shadow's always been afraid of, and I think that this is related to his vision, or was related to his vision, is like anything that's the color white. So like a white saddle pad, white polo wraps. One time I went to get something, like he had like goop in the corner of his eye, and I went to get it with a paper towel, and he like lost his mind. So that's definitely something that we can work on. But otherwise, no, I haven't really changed the way that I reinforce him. I think, if anything, to not speak behaviorally, I'm more forgiving. Because there are times where he's like, oh my gosh, Mom, there's a wall there and you didn't tell me. And I'm like, you're right. I did not tell you. Another thing that I've noticed is that if I put him in cross ties or walk him down a hallway or something, he automatically assumes that it's like symmetrical. So whatever he can see on his right side, since he lost his left eye, he automatically assumes that it's going to be the same on the other side as well. Kate, that's awesome that you do that. I think that's one of the best ways, because horses tend to really go through, their senses and rely on a lot of the hearing stuff. So I think that's perfect, and it's a good environmental change to do. That's one of the other things that you can do for certain behaviors. So, and you'll see this probably a lot, is that like, we have this one gate that you can sort of like click shut, and my horse learned to open it. What can I do about that? Just put a latch on the gate. Like if there's a thing that in the environment that you can change rather than trying to implement this big behavioral program, then just change the thing in the environment. I used to work with a student who, anytime he would become really upset and engage in tantruming behavior, he would throw chairs. And I had him at a small table where there was 3 chairs, and I was in one, he was in the other, and then there was an empty one. So he would stand up, and I would just sit on my chair. And the second he would stand up and start to tantrum, I would just remove the chairs from the environment. He can't engage in chair throwing behavior if he doesn't have any chairs. But don't worry, he found other things to throw. All right, so moving on, we have one last question. And then if you guys comment any other questions, I'll go over them. But otherwise, we're getting close to sort of wrapping up here. The last question comes from somebody named Jennifer. She commented asking specifically about her horse. So she said, my horse's trail behavior has gone from so predictable to unpredictable. He's 30. What's up? No lameness or health issues, but we are riding new trails. Still, he's gone in many places in his life. Okay, so one of the first things that I want to point out in this question / comment that she gave us, no lameness or health issues. Before you ever implement any behavioral procedures, the first thing you need to do if you're experiencing maladaptive behaviors or challenging behaviors or whatever you want to call them, behaviors that you don't want anymore, is you need to make sure that there's no medical issue that's preceding it. You'll see this a lot of the time, especially, at least I see it a lot of the time in the Facebook groups I'm in too. It's like somebody will post a video of their horse like bucking down the long side at the canter and be like, who thinks it's pain, who thinks it's behavior? And that's one of the most important things, is like, you need to make sure that it's not caused by a medical concern, because that should be your first and foremost. Not only is it super unethical to try to just like brush that aside and move forward with a behavioral plan, but it also, no behavioral plan is going to stick if you're trying to challenge essentially what would be considered automatic reinforcement, which is where the animal would give it to themselves. So like if they're using automatic reinforcement to essentially escape from pain. Moving forward with that, so that's definitely a good start. She says, so predictable to unpredictable. He's 30. So she did say that there's no lameness or health issues. One of the things that I might want to, mention is that it's possible maybe his vision or hearing is going, and all of a sudden something's right there and he didn't know. I mean, horses are prey animals. That's something that you could look into. I mean, when she said no lameness or health issues, I didn't know if she looked at that stuff too. Just a suggestion. The next part that I want to pick apart is, she says, we are riding new trails. So, environments are really important to everybody, but especially to horses, because they're prey animals. So they know where they feel comfortable, and they know where they don't know where they are. So, for those of you that have taken a horse, trailered them off property to like their first show ever, and they totally lost their mind, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, it's the same thing for humans. Each environment and different stimuli in that environment can signal different things to you. And the things that signal you can be called either a discriminative stimulus or a discriminative delta. And we'll get into all that fun stuff later. I love discriminative stimuli. But more importantly, if he's unfamiliar with the environment, he could just be, getting a little apprehensive about it and is not constantly sure. The main part that I feel bad that I can't really answer this question, because the things that maintain behaviors are called contingencies. So again, it's from that post from earlier where I went over antecedent behavior consequence. So the antecedent, what happens right before the behavior itself, and then the consequence, which is just whatever happens after the behavior, whether or not you administer it, anything. And you'll see this a lot with like horses that have what's considered vices. So like weaving in a stall, or cribbing, or pawing, or anything like that. People are like, well, what's maintaining this behavior? And they're like, well, I'm not reinforcing it. You don't have to. A lot of those behaviors are going to be automatic reinforcement. So let's think about it. If you're on a new trail on your horse, and next to you there's a bush, and the bush rattles or shuffles or whatever, and your horse spooks 5 steps sideways, and you look down and you saw, like, it's just a squirrel, that doesn't register to the horse, right? This is the horse's antecedent behavior consequence. There was a noise that it wasn't familiar with. It spooked 5 steps sideways. It was not eaten. Those are your 3 things. So that behavior of essentially escaping a predator, whatever it may be, it's a squirrel, the horse does not have that information. That behavior was reinforced. That was negative reinforcement. It removed the aversive stimulus from the environment by stepping 5 steps sideways and almost launching you in the process. So the fact that you did nothing in that situation still warrants the fact that that was reinforcement. And reinforcement is something that is a consequence that allows behaviors to happen at a stronger frequency or stronger intensity in the future. So I can't really do much except say that you as a rider, as a horse owner, should look at the contingencies that may or may not be maintaining your horse's behavior and move forward from there. I would say if it's specifically the new trails, then that would be one thing, and that would most likely be the fact that it's a different environment. If it's both trails and trails he's been on for a while and you aren't noticing any differences, then it's possible that, hearing or vision might be a concern, and I would get those looked at in addition to the lameness. So, those were all our questions. Thanks for everybody who joined us for this. If you guys have any comments or questions, you can post them below, and I'll do them in the next video for the Q&A. Or if you just want to have a topic discussed, drop it below, and we can do a video on that as well. But otherwise, that's all I have for you guys. Thanks for joining in, and I'll see you guys soon. Have a good weekend.